those kids are 4 times more likely to live in poverty, 4 times more likely to suffer abuse, sexual abuse or physical abuse. They are 3 times more likely to suffer from their own substance abuse and addiction issues. They're more likely to be obese. What you see is in any household context where children lose a relationship with one or both biological parents, and especially if an unrelated adult joins the home, rates of abuse and neglect skyrocket. In surrogacy, it always requires a child to lose a relationship with the only person they know on the day that they are born, not because of tragedy, but because an adult wants something.
The culture is just doing everything to affirm us in that belief that our feeling right now is what matters the most.
You need to figure out a way to make that marriage work, because the only alternative is to force your kids to do hard things by living in split homes and developing split lives. Everybody at some point, single, married, gay, straight, fertile, and infertile, is going to have to elevate the rights of children above their own desires, self-interest, identity, feelings, longings, or losses. Right? When we elevated adult fulfillment to the highest levels, well, that means kids have to sacrifice for adults.
First of all, in your work, you talk a lot about children's rights. How do you understand them to be different from just human rights?
Yes, very good. Well, we have a UN Declaration on Human Rights, and there are very important principles laid out for just humans in general. But then there also is the most widely ratified treaty in the world, the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. And that actually lays out special protections and provisions for children, because specifically they're the demographic that literally cannot defend themselves. And so that document lays out distinct rights that they have because of their vulnerable status, and the obligations that both parents and state parties have to provide that to them. So obviously children's rights are humans' rights, but there is a subsection of rights that we need to extend to this group of people, specifically because they are so vulnerable.
Okay. And I've heard you talk about it before. You said something alongside the lines, and I'm paraphrasing, give me enough time and I will say something to piss you off. So just to start the podcast and give our audience a little bit of preparation for what we are going to be talking about, I think that one of the easiest ways to disagree with your arguments is to put you squarely in the box of put whatever minority group you want, phobe, and just assume that you are a bigot in the sheep's skin. So let's just address that before we even move on to the divorce and surrogacy and other things.
Yeah, well, if you research me, you'll see all of the typical like anti-gay, anti-trans, blah, blah, blah. And it's true that we strongly critique things like gay marriage, things like men procuring motherless children through surrogacy. I mean, we're going to be some of what I hope the most compelling and the most dominant voices in those spaces. But the reality is that our child-centric message is children have a right to their mother and father. Adults, you need to orient your lives around the rights of those children. And that is a message that makes demands of everybody. That is a message that at some point is going to confront every adult. It is going to insist that all adults sacrifice for children in some ways, because the only alternative is for kids to sacrifice for adults. And that's a system characterized by injustice. And so what we talk about is how, everybody at some point, single, married, gay, straight, fertile, and infertile, is going to have to elevate the rights of children above their own desires, self-interest, identity, feelings, longings, or losses. That's just simply how it goes. So what does that mean? That means that if you are a young heterosexual boyfriend and girlfriend who were shacking up or sleeping around, and you find yourself with an unplanned pregnancy, well, you need to do hard things so the child doesn't lose their right to life or right to their mother and father. You need to reorient your life around the baby, right? Probably commit to the child's life and hopefully commit to one another so the child has both their right to life and their right to their mother and father protected. That's hard. Adults have to do hard things in those situations. Similarly, if you are in a marriage and you're one of the 70% of couples that are considering exiting that marriage, not for reasons of abuse, adultery, abandonment, or addiction, but simply because you've fallen out of love, or you're interested in someone else, or you're dealing with communication issues, or struggling with, childhood emotional baggage, or emotional affairs, or, pornography challenges, and all the different things that plague marriages. Well, our message to you is you need to do hard things. You need to figure out a way to make that marriage work, because the only alternative is to force your kids to do hard things by living in split homes and developing split lives. To the person who is 40 and single and desperately wants to be a mother or a father, but hasn't found Mr. Right or Mrs. Right, our message to you is, I understand your biological clock is working against you, but the solution cannot be to drive over to the sperm bank and inseminate yourself and create an intentionally fatherless baby. No, you have to conform your life to the rights of children. The answer is not to make a child sacrifice their mother or father for you. If you experience same-sex attraction, and you would be an amazing father or an amazing mother, forcing the child to conform their life to your romantic inclinations is an injustice. If you want children, great. Find, form, and maintain a relationship with the child's other biological parent in a married household so the child doesn't lose anything to join your life. That's hard. That's a very, very demanding expectation. And similarly, if you're struggling with infertility, the answer is not to find a third party to purchase their sperm, their egg, or rent their womb. That always results in a child losing a relationship with one or both parents to whom they have a natural right. In surrogacy, it always requires a child to lose a relationship with the only person they know on the day that they are born, not because of tragedy, but because an adult wants something. So it's like when I say, give me enough time and I'll piss you off too, that's what I mean. Everybody has to sacrifice at some point. And, I'll add to that, if you're in a stable, loving, heterosexual marriage, even if you already have kids, you might need to consider grafting a child into your home who doesn't have one, who especially is older or special needs or in foster care, who, might be in a sibling group where there's not a lot of people that are willing to take those children into care. Maybe you need to do hard things by conforming your life and welcoming a child into your home who's lost their mother or father. I mean, this worldview of putting children before adults, it means adults do hard things. But the only alternative is for kids to do hard things. And that's just not a world characterized by justice.
100 years ago, you would be considered a sage of wisdom. I suppose nowadays you could be described as a professional heretic in certain circles, big fertility being one of them. But let's sort of just backtrack a little bit to when you started really focusing on a biological father and a biological mother raising kids. Why the biological pair of a mother and a father are the optimal way to raise children?
Well, when I first started writing, I didn't know that biology was such a big deal. I just knew that moms and dads were a big deal because I had been around a lot of kids who had lost their mom or dad, and it resulted in a lifelong wound. But then the more that I researched about the importance of marriage and family, and the more that I looked at the dramatic devastation leveled on children who experience family breakdown, even if they were raised in a step family household, even if they were grafted into an adoptive family, it was very obvious through the decades of social science research that we have on family structure that biology confers several things on children that simply intending to parent can't. Number one, it statistically grants children with the adults who are the most connected to, invested in, and protective of them, either because of our sin nature or because of evolutionary forces. Unrelated adults simply don't make the same level of connection, investment, and don't care for and watch over children the same way they do their own biological offspring. So what you see is in any household context where children lose a relationship with one or both biological parents, and especially if an unrelated adult joins the home, rates of abuse and neglect skyrocket. So it's undeniable that biology confers a level of just safety and investedness that wanting kids or just being interested in the child's biological parent doesn't grant them. The other reason why biology matters so greatly is because only a child's biological parents grant something that they crave, and that is their biological identity. I used to be the former assistant at the largest Chinese adoption agency in the world. I was in the adoption world before I became a mom. Now I've got 3 biological kids and I have 1 adopted child. He is ours. I mean, he is a Faust forever. But there are some things that I can't fully compensate for that he's lost. There's answers that I can't give him. There's insights into his identity that he can't discover by looking at his dad and me. And those kinds of things tend to matter to adopted children. They certainly matter when we survey children who were intentionally severed from their biological mother and father at the moment of conception through reproductive technologies. So biology is a major force in child well-being, both in terms of like safety, love, connection, and investment, but also in terms of helping kids answer the question, who am I? Because it's very, very hard for kids to answer the question, who am I? If they can't answer the question, whose am I?
Genealogical bewilderment. Is that it?
That is exactly
I
the clinical term that has been observed in adoptees for decades.
So tell us a little bit more about what that is, less about science. What does that look like for the kids that are affected by it?
Yeah, it's interesting because they first started to notice it among adoptees who were placed with their parents during what was known as the baby scoop era. This is like the 50s, 60s, and 70s when out of wedlock births were still quite stigmatized, and they would take white babies, white infants, and place them with white parents. And sometimes these children didn't even know they were adopted because the parents were told it doesn't matter, don't tell them. It's better off if they never knew, even sometimes. And yet these kids had this sense of otherness. They would describe it as feeling like aliens, separated, like disconnected, disassociated from their own bodies. Like there was something wrong. They had a sense that they didn't belong somehow. And then there's one story that we have of a woman on our website, thembeforeus.com. One of the things we have is a story bank of kids who have lost a relationship with their mother or father, talking about how that impacted their childhood and then even into their adulthood, their parenthood, their life long term. And she talked about how when she discovered that her father who raised her was not her biological father because she was created through sperm donation. And she talks about how she couldn't look at herself in the mirror because suddenly she realized that she couldn't place half of her features, that she felt like an alien looking back at herself, that she felt like she was a stranger in her own body, and that it plunged her into an identity crisis. It was a bewilderment about her own genealogy, her own genes didn't make sense to her. So that's not actually an uncommon experience. We've got especially adoptees talking about that feeling of otherness, like they just don't fit in the family. And now we've got this new generation of children who were intentionally separated from a mother or father through reproductive technologies, also talking about how not only do they feel that genealogical bewilderment, but add on top of that the fact that they were created through commercial processes where they were often literally selected from a catalog, a donor, sperm donor or egg donor catalog, where you could sift and sort and select different attributes, different features of the child. So they not only have that genealogical bewilderment, but they also have this feeling of commodification that goes along with it. So this separation of children from their biological parents is no small deal for them. And then once you commercialize it and industrialize it, we're just heaping additional burdens on children's shoulders.
It's interesting when I was talking about it with a friend of mine, and she sort of started questioning me, I suppose, about the science and the figures. And I tried to remember her assumption, I suppose, or her first response to things like surrogacy, for example, was, well, what is the percentage of children that are really affected that would warrant us saying no to a real pain that some people will feel, that they feel like they need the child to fill that void in their life. I think the one thing is we can all appreciate how real the pain of not being able to have a child that you really would love to have is. So she was trying to essentially weigh up the suffering of adults against potential suffering of children. So
Yes, so
how
you're
would
going
you
to find
approach that?
that. Yeah. Well, and that's the game that we play in all of these matters of marriage and family is the adults are fully capable and very willing to share their own longings, losses, hurts, identity, struggles, wishes, pain. The kids can't. The kids just have to deal with whatever the adults decide. And adults, especially in matters of marriage and family, because the feelings are so strong, they don't have any problem articulating, defending, advocating, and really forcefully communicating what they want, because these are very often urgent and strong and persistent, experiences that they have, whether it's that struggling marriage or those feelings of same-sex attraction or the pain of infertility. I mean, those can be all consuming for adults. And so in every area of marriage and family, that's actually one of the reasons I started Them Before Us, is because any topic about marriage and family, whether you're talking about the definition of marriage or divorce, or how do same-sex parents fare, and how do their kids, what are the outcomes for their kids, and gay men who want to use surrogates, and infertile couples who need IVF, and people who don't have children but want to be parents through adoption. Every conversation about marriage and family obsessively focuses on adult desires. And just, you can fact check me. Keep your eye out the next time you read a headline about somebody that is getting married, get divorced, using reproductive technologies. How often do they mention the kid? Do they ever talk about the child's rights or needs or well-being? Slim to none is the answer to that. And I know because I have Google alerts that tell me anytime there's a headline using the topic surrogacy, anytime there's a headline that focuses on the topic of marriage, it's always about what adults want, somebody's journey, somebody's struggle, someone's self-discovery. It's never about the kids. So I expect that we're all very familiar with the adult's perspective on all of these topics. Our challenge is being familiar with the child's rights, the child's needs, the child's pain. And that is what Them Before Us seeks to do. So when you say, but how often are kids hurt by that? Well, that's a very challenging topic, because whenever you get to these new iterations of marriage and family, all we have is adult testimony. It takes years and years and years to actually study these phenomenon to see the impact that they have on children. For example, when there was the divorce explosion in the 70s, we had entire books, TV shows dedicated to talking about how not only was divorce okay, it was actually really good for kids. Like, kids did better when they had 2 Christmases. Kids were happier when their own parents were fulfilled and happy, even if it meant that they had to live in 2 different homes. Well, we've had decades to study divorce, and now it's very clear that there is no such thing as a good divorce. Children are harmed even when it is a low conflict divorce that was, broke up a low conflict marriage and the parents were nice and friendly to each other afterwards. It always tanks children, physical health, mental health, emotional health, academic health, relational health. It damages their own prospects for marriage as well. So then we just did it again with same-sex parenting, right? Something else that the world has never seen before, households headed by 2 men or 2 women. And we didn't have data on that because it's not possible in our species. And so we rushed all of these studies that were largely based on what adults said about themselves. And it turns out when the adults are talking on behalf of the kids, or when we're just measuring it based on how the adults feel, miraculously, the kids love it. It's amazing. They love being raised in homes that exclude their mother or father. Well, it'll be a couple more decades, and we will get the stories and we will get the studies, and it will turn out that all the things that natural law validates about who children are and what those needs and what they need will be proven true, right? But right now we're arguing against silence. In many ways we're arguing, except for all of the mountains of data that we know that biological parents matter, that mothers and father offer distinct and complementary benefits to children, that anytime kids lose a parent, it harms them. Other than those truths, same-sex parenting is great, right? So now we're moving into the surrogate world where people are saying, well, are kids really harmed from this? Are they really harmed? And the answer is, we don't know, because our species is not familiar with motherless babies. Like, it's actually very, very hard for humans to make motherless children. We've never seen it before, not on an intentional level. We've got experience with children who lose their mothers at birth. And until modern medicine, until NICUs, until bottles, those babies just died. Like that's how important the mother-child bond is, right? But now we're moving into this new epoch where they're like, but where's the data? Where's the harm? What's showing that these kids suffer when they're commercially and intentionally separated from their mother the day that they are born? I mean, show me the data. And the answer is the fact that we don't have data on all of these novel family arrangements doesn't validate that they are okay. It actually communicates that this is not the kind of thing that we should ever be doing with human children because it's so antithetical to what it means to be a child. So I understand friends that go, but I mean, really, what's the harm? But the answer is there's great harm, especially if you look at it from the perspective of the child.
There is something interesting about a visceral reaction to certain stories. So, one of the things that you shared recently was a middle-aged man from South America that managed to purchase himself an infant baby, and he was raising that baby as a single man. I had a visceral reaction to that. And perhaps it was because I've still got a toddler who is over 2 years, and I am still his point of contact when he's emotionally upset. And it, especially in the first year of infant's life, the job of a husband or a father is largely supporting the mother. Men really start coming in when the kids are a little bit older. Initially, the kids, they are built not to be separated from the mothers. And you've got this line in your book, which is, and I'm paraphrasing again, we used to mourn kids being orphaned. Now we create orphans. And that was just, I just couldn't quite shake that visceral feeling that I had that it's just wrong on so many levels. But everyone seems to be doing it. And looking out there, why is nobody stopping to ask the questions? What is your
Because we live in a
experience?
culture, yeah. Why is all of this massive overhaul of marriage and family taking place? Why is there an unregulated market where you can buy and sell infants who may or may not be related to you with no kind of screening or background checks? Why? And like, why are we stripping the words mother and father out of all of our parenthood laws? Why is it that we're saying that any adult has a right to adopt, even if it's not in the child's best interest? Why is it that cohabitation rates are skyrocketing instead of marriage? Why is it that we're promoting single motherhood or single fatherhood by choice? Why? And it's because we've exalted adult sexual desire and sexual feeling to the highest aim. It's because that has become God. And when adult sexual desire becomes God, children are the required sacrifice. So we set this up for ourselves, right? When we elevated adult fulfillment to the highest levels, well, that means kids have to sacrifice for adults. And, you don't see it as starkly when it's, for example, an infertile woman's sister who's carrying the woman's genetic children for her. But you see it very, very starkly when that man goes to Mexico to buy a baby, doesn't know, holds the baby like he's holding a sack of potatoes. And he literally has a picture that looks like a mugshot. Then you see very, very clearly the consequences of elevating adult sexual desire or adult fulfillment to the highest levels. And it is that children will lose. They lose their life. They lose their family. They very often lose a safe and secure home. They lose stability. We're heading to dystopia is actually where we're going. That's really where we're already there in a lot of senses in terms of reproductive technologies, and it's not getting any better. So we've got a choice before us. Are we going to continue to say, to select some sympathetic cases where adults really genuinely might be suffering and say, you know what, just let the adults have what they want? Or are we going to understand that genuinely all marriage and family issues come down to a matter of justice for children and start defending kids? Those are the two choices before us.
And I think the celebrating the adults perhaps not doing the right thing is it's visible everywhere. If you happen to follow Kardashians, I don't, but you just couldn't escape them from the news when one of the Kardashians, no idea which one, did go through surrogacy. And she then opened up to say that she regretted it. And she was talking apparently about how hard it was for her to bond with the baby. And the outpour, because I've seen the screenshots of the outpour of sympathy towards her on the internet. Very one-sided, it seems. And it's exactly the same when it comes to divorce. If anyone just says that they are getting divorced finally on Facebook, it's like everyone seems to be clapping. And it does seem to be that currently, like you said, our freedoms are the top of the pyramid of needs, and the culture is just doing everything to affirm us in that belief that our feeling right now is what matters the most. But it's a weird thing of it's a weird way of looking at life, because nothing is like that. If we were all looking at short-term gratification, we would all be having affairs. Because on a night out, why wouldn't you have a fling if all you're thinking about is the next half an hour? But if you're thinking about next week, next month, next year, next 10 years, your decisions are completely different. And it is
That's
hard.
right.
And we know it because we've all tried dieting, right?
Yeah, right. That's what I was going to say. Like if immediate gratification was the aim, we'd all be fat, we'd be broke, we'd be, like filled with STDs. All of our appetites would absolutely govern us. And our appetites are very, very harsh taskmasters, right? Like they will enslave you. So, the only, and then obviously when it comes to our sexual appetites, they enslave children too, right? It's not just us that have consequences for our sexual behavior. It's the children that come from those sexual decisions as well. And so either our appetites are going to govern us or we are going to govern them. At some point, you're going to do the hard thing. At some point, someone is going to do hard things. We just think that it should be the adults that do hard things so the children don't have to.
I've got this hypothesis about part of why we are seeing a lot of issues in our culture nowadays is because every generation is like a tsunami wave that brings all of their problems that started in their childhood. Who is being parents right now? Who are being parents now already of like teenagers? The same people that were caught in the explosion of divorces. We are seeing now 2 generations after that, and those generations come 20, 30 years later with a tsunami of their own problems. And it does feel to me like we are carrying it into the future, more and more baggage. And
I think you're exactly right. And that's what we see in the data too. We see skyrocketing rates of cohabitation because you've got young people that say, marriage is dangerous. Marriage is risky. I learned from my parents' marriage that anyone can leave me at any moment for any reason, and I'll never see it coming. And for men, they look at marriage and say, and that woman can take away half my income and all of my children, and I will be bound to that, custody contract until my kids are 18. And so in the minds of a lot of people that grew up in the 80s, 90s, early 2000s, marriage looks dangerous. Marriage looks risky. Cohabitation, on the other hand, hey, that's very low risk. But when you actually look at the numbers, cohabitation is bad for everybody. You're poorer, you break up more often, and it's definitely worse for the kids. You're likely to have a child born into that cohabiting union. Those kids are 4 times more likely to live in poverty, 4 times more likely to suffer abuse, sexual abuse or physical abuse. They are 3 times more likely to suffer from their own substance abuse and addiction issues. They're more likely to be obese. I mean, like, cohabitation looks safe, but in reality, it's bad for everybody. But you've got this, I think what you're saying is exactly right. You've got a damaged generation, a generation that learned that marriage can hurt you instead of understanding the reality is that someone who has not given their entire life to you in front of your family and friends with a symmetrical commitment where you're both giving all of yourself to one another forever. If you don't have that, you're so much more likely to be hurt in every way that a person can be hurt. But you're right. We're bringing in those childhood wounds. And a lot of that has to do with, it points to the drastically falling marriage and parenthood rates, because we've just learned there's too much pain in family. Unfortunately, that means that because we're not getting married, because we're not having children, and if we are, we're doing it outside of these protected bonds, that is actually where you're seeing these skyrocketing rates of loneliness, meaninglessness, and despair.
There is another interesting statistic. I'm going to butcher it, but the likelihood that you will split up, even if you will get married after cohabitation, is higher if you have lived together before the marriage, the actual marriage, and then perhaps starting a family. So I think that idea of trialing your partner has been also debunked in science. But for some reason, like the marriage, for example, the case for marriage in terms of the science, I don't think we've ever had data saying that marriage is actually bad. So why are we still seeing all of these changes and policies literally falling over each other, giving us more and more flexibility to make marriage even more disposable than it already is?
Well, again, I think it goes back to that immediate adult gratification, that marriage does impose constraints on you. It imposes constraints on your behavior, on your choices, on your energy. And I think that in our modern day culture, we have equated constraints with oppression. And so we want to be free of all oppression. And that means being free of all constraints, all commitments, and really what that means is bonds. You want to be free of any obligations to your parents, to your children, to a spouse. And you can do that. And like you said, that's a recipe for some very short term, very fleeting happiness. But it is a disaster when it comes to long term fulfillment, long term meaning, long term connection. And a lot of these things, they sound really good in your 20s and your 30s. Once you get to be 40, 50, especially as a woman, when you haven't gotten married and you don't have children, and maybe you're caring for your aging parents and you're thinking, there's nobody that will care for me. Nobody. Sometimes you realize too late that the world has lied to you about the importance of forming and prioritizing these critical familial bonds.
Stephen Shaw from The Birth Gap calls this unplanned childlessness. I spoke to him a couple of weeks ago, and his number that he arrived on the percentage of women that will not end up having child is currently sitting around, they reckon it's about 30%, which is astonishingly high, bearing in mind that only between 5 to 8% of women just generally never want to have kids. That still leaves 22 to 25% of women that wanted to have a child but will end up not having one for whatever reason. Quite usually it's the circumstances, and how that looks into the future for these women is a grim picture, and we are seeing that already in Japan. So I do think that the culture seriously has to start teaching women about other things than just sexual freedom, and perhaps sexual education should cover a little bit more about the fertility window, for example, because I think a lot of women have been sold a lie that they can just have it all and that things are just going to work out and the IVF is brilliant and it works all the time and there is no side effects. And somehow there was a huge generation of women that were somehow not told that between 30 and 40 is not an optimal age to start having a family. And for a lot of these women, it's just going to be too late.
Yeah.
And I think
It's
then
really sad.
there is this push of, well, you've got IVF and you've got all of those options, and the temptation, I suppose, from your work to prioritize their feelings, their current discomfort, rather than trying to imagine what it's going to be like for their kids potentially.
Yes, there are so many lies that we're telling young women, so many lies about their own bodies, so many lies about the way the world works, so many lies about the world in general. Lies that, the world has enough humans, overpopulation is a problem. That's a lie. The reality is that underpopulation is going to be the big crisis over the next several years. The lie that humans are a parasite on the planet, that's a lie. Humans are the planet's greatest resource and we need more children to really solve the world's problems. The lie that you can have a baby in your 30s or 40s, and that's a lie. Your prime childbearing years are in your late teens, in your 20s, in your early 30s. Anybody after 35, it's considered a geriatric pregnancy. The lie that your career needs to look exactly like a man's. The lie that you can have it all, which is true. You just can't have it all at once. You have to have marriage first and you have to have children first. There's just so many lies that we tell you. The lie that career is going to matter more to you than children is an absolute lie. The lie that marriage is dangerous. The lie that liberation looks like having free sex with anybody that you want and never getting tied down. I mean, there's so many lies that we're telling young women, and it is harming them. It is harming them. Right now you've got women, in the United States, recent studies have come out to say that liberal, progressive, white women are the most highly medicated, the most anxious, and the most depressed. They're also the ones that are most likely to imbibe these, progressive ideas about anti-marriage, anti-child, environmentalism, save the planet kind of stuff. And it's not working out well for them. So, we've got to tell women the truth about their own bodies, about the nature of the world, about the importance of marriage and family, that to be successful in life, they don't have to act like a man and want the same things as a man and have the same career trajectory as a man. In essence, we've been telling them to have a fulfilling life, you need to reject the realities of your body. I mean, it has literally put women at war with themselves. So of course they're going to experience higher levels of anxiety and depression and meaninglessness and hopelessness because they're in conflict, with the way that they're designed to operate. So yeah, we just need to tell women the truth, and start telling them early and often.
Okay, so let's sort of start turning maybe a little bit more towards a little bit more practical applications of trying to better the lives for kids for the future. We've sort of touched upon a lot of subjects, and I'm sure we'll come back to them at some point. But I want to almost give people a little bit of recipe based on the studies. What is the best way to currently raise kids that are resilient and are not losing their minds as soon as they go to school in the current times, because we are living through very turbulent times and I can't foresee it getting better over the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, I agree. So the basics, the foundations are covered in our first book, Them Before Us, Why We Need a Global Children's Rights Movement. And those basics are children need their mother and their father loving each other and loving them every day of their life. Those are what we call the staples of a child's social emotional diet. The three staples that children need to feast on every day so they can establish physical health, mental health, emotional health, relational health is mother's love, father's love, and stability. Marrying your child's other parent and staying together until death do you part is the way to give children those emotional staples. So once you have that baseline figured out, what do you do about raising resilient children in this crazy culture? Because it's nuts. And it's not just a crazy culture. It is a culture that is seeking to evangelize and disciple your children into some of the most dangerous ideologies that really man has ever devised, truly. So for that, I would point you towards my second book, which is called Raising Conservative Kids in a Woke City. And it's how do you inculcate a worldview in your children when everything is against you? How do you teach them economic, historical, and biological truth when their teachers, their friends, social media, Netflix, maybe their extended family, maybe their church is lying to them? And so we, my co-author Stacy and I lay out how we've done that in what is arguably the most hostile city in the United States, the one that is most bent on confronting and destroying what we would, consider to be objectively true realities about the world, how our bodies work, how the economy works, how history has been laid out, all of those kinds of things. So we have established some principles. Well, what we've done is we've captured some timeless parenting principles. We've applied them to our current moment. And then we've sort of offered some principles on how to walk your kids through those different topics that they need to become experts on in different age appropriate ways. We've kind of laid out, what do you do when they're like 0 to 10? What do you do in that 11 to 13-year-old range? And then what do you do when they're high schoolers, like 14 years old and older? So we've got a strategy for you because it is war. I mean, if you're raising kids in the culture today, they don't just need food, shelter, and a hug. They need to be equipped on the morality of the free market. They do. They need to know the difference between chemical and surgical abortion. They need to understand the distinctives of male and female, and therefore what marriage is and what it means for all of society. They need to understand the founding principles and the goodness of Western civilization because it's absolutely under attack. So we pull out these conservative principles and we walk parents through how do you explain this to your kids in age appropriate ways so they are not victimized by the culture, but they are victorious over the culture.
And then would you have, or what advice perhaps would you have for people that are a little bit behind us still and they are just getting into relationships, perhaps thinking about starting a family? Because I think that in terms of the marriage, it's way, way easier to choose wisely before saying I do than it is to rescue something that might not be, your best decision whilst you're already in it. Because there are some people that just simply will not allow you to reason with them. So I suppose though there are genuinely situations where it is better to abandon the marriage. And I think there is no argument that there are some rare situations where it is better, but it's way easier to just choose wiser. And I think the dating market, as with anything else currently, is rather challenging for both sexes for different reasons.
Yeah. Well, that is undoubtedly true. It is very, very hard to find to date and marry right now because we've got two extremes taking place. We've got no dating and we've got shacking up. We've got friend zone and we've got hooking up. I mean, we've kind of lost this culture of like casual, steady dating processes that slowly unfold over time with the purpose of leading towards marriage. So we've lost a dating culture, which is a really big problem. So first of all, I would say, understand that you should prioritize marriage. I mean, if you're in your late teens, if you're in your 20s, you should not have the mindset of, oh, I'll do this in my 30s. Start thinking about it now. I mean, late teens, right? Start thinking about now. Start thinking about, hey, I should be looking for somebody that I can share my life with. Not to say you need to like figure it out right now and fall in love, but that should be a priority for you. If you're thinking about career goals, great. You should also think about marriage and family goals. And my recommendation would be the number one thing that you should be looking for is not necessarily chemistry, not necessarily who you have a spark with. the number one thing you should be looking for is value alignment. Who agrees with you about the biggest questions in life? The nature of God, the nature of man, the nature of the world, the problem with the world, the solution to the problem in the world, right? You answer those fundamental questions in the same way, you're going to have a really good foundation for a life together where you're working as partners side by side. And then all the other questions and problems that emerge in marriage, which happens in every marriage, you'll actually be able to solve them if you're operating from a similar worldview. The way that I talk about it with the teens in my life, I run the youth ministry at churches. I say your worldview is like a ticket on a train that's heading in a certain direction. So if you're holding a train ticket to London and the person you're dating is holding a train ticket to Dublin, you guys are going to get on those trains and you're going to head in different directions, right? That's what worldview is. You want to make sure you're holding tickets on the same train so that when you board the journey of life, you're heading in the same direction. So first, make marriage a priority. Then when you're evaluating the people in your world, look for worldview alignment first. And then I'd say if you find that person, go out with them. Go on some dates with them. I recommend three dates. If you find somebody whose value aligns with you, and I'd say if you find somebody that you really are attracted to and there's a really good spark, go on 3 dates with them too. Because sometimes it takes a little while to unfold the interest or unfold the spark or unfold what you guys believe about the world. If you have either one of those, value alignment or some real chemistry and compatibility, see where it goes. And if it looks like there is not value alignment, let it go. And I will tell you, if you're shacking up, it's really going to complicate things. You're not going to be able to see clearly, right? There's something going on in your body when you have sex with somebody. There's actually, especially for women, 20 seconds of skin to skin contact releases oxytocin. That obviously happens through sex very powerfully for women. But that oxytocin release communicates to your body, I belong with him. We're going to be together forever. This is the chemical that moms release when they are breastfeeding that creates such a fierce bond between mother and child. And so if you're shacking up, if you're having sex, your body is making a commitment that your brain is not ready to deliver on. So you really need to physically hold back, but emotionally take some risk. So that's what I would say is prioritize it. This is good for you. Start thinking about it early, but do think about it, right? Just like you said, it is very important to go into marriage with eyes wide open, especially with value alignment. So a good place to look for somebody is at your church. Go to places where you already know that people agree with you in terms of worldview. Meeting somebody at the bar might be a little more challenging to agree on things like child rearing, right? Or what you're going to do for holidays, or who's going to stay home when you guys have kids, or whatever it is. So you should do it. You should get married to the right person.
I think certainly the pool of people that are actually interested in long-term relationship, for example, on Tinder, is just, statistically speaking, this is not where you're going to find a relationship.
Right.
So this is really good. Okay, so we know how to get into a relationship. We then know how we need to raise resilient children. For anyone that is interested about to find out about your work, I highly recommend Them Before Us. I've got your new book on order, but I haven't read it yet. The one thing that I wanted to ask you is, what is coming up for Them Before Us and you in the next 2 to 5 years? What are you working on? What are you hoping to achieve?
So many things. We're currently developing a documentary called This Is a Child that is going to be distributed globally, major production, and it follows the same outline of a speech that I gave a couple of years called This Is a Child at the National Conservative Conference. So go look that speech up. It's the only thing I ever wrote out word for word. So it'll give you an idea of what we're up to with our documentary. We've got policy work that we're doing to attack big corporations and how big corporations deconstruct the rights of children through their corporate benefits package for the sake of increasing their ESG scores, right? So they look better by destroying the rights of children. And so I just, I hate it. So I'm we're gunning for you, big business. We're going to take you out. We have a satirical film that's going to go along with that, which I'm really excited about. We have a legal, I'm tired of playing defense on policy matters. Like the other side just makes such massive gains in terms of legislation because there's nobody that speaks up on behalf of children. So we are starting a policy department, a legal department that will really be able to offer robust child defense state by state, country by country. I mean, the European Union is pushing this on all the little nations that don't have the capacity to fight back. These massive international LGBT organizations just roll into like Greece and Albania and Croatia and just overhaul centuries of tradition, in the name of their progressive religion. So we just want to stand against that for kids in the States and across the world. And I'm currently working on a new book project that's going to bring together major voices on every major policy issue and framing it from the perspective of the child. So I don't yet have a publisher for that, so I can't say it yet. But stay tuned because that is going to be off the charts.
Okay, it's interesting what you said about European Union. I come from Poland, so I stay in touch with what's going on, especially that Poland has been in the news a lot in the UK, mostly because I think Poland, Hungary, I think one of the Eastern European countries have essentially stopped getting donations from the EU because they refused certain rules that they were sort of applying to them. So they were being penalized month after month, year after year, because they said no to these rules and certain very modern ideas that were trying to be sort of introduced to those nations. So it's interesting to see how that's going to sort of play out on the legislation. I mean, I hope that when you do have that legislation up and running in the States, that this is something that the UK is actually going to import. Because right now UK just imports all the bad idea that America has. It never actually imports any of the good stuff. So I hope that will be different. And then for people listening that perhaps are in the different countries, what can they do to try and even influence policies? Can they do anything?
Yes, you need to create a presence in your country that specifically advocates on behalf of children. And if you email my team at thembeforeus.com, us@thembeforeus.com, and if you're in Poland, or if you're in Slovenia, or if you're in Thailand, and you say, I know that this is coming for us. I know that we've tried to battle it. I know that we've lost sometimes. I know that it's still on the way. Email us. We'll help you. We'll coach you on how to create a little presence, and not even a forceful presence in your country to defend the rights of children. This template that we have, it works everywhere because children all across the globe are made of the same stuff and need the same things. And so the same kind of child-centric defense works everywhere.
Okay. I think the one thing as well that really brought it home was the stories that you put in your book. They really hit you in the stomach. And what I love as well about the book is between you and Stacey, you've managed to write a book that is extremely serious, and yet you've managed to inject this really dry, just wonderfully dry sense of humor in there somewhere. And I think the balance of the two is really fantastic. I mean, I highly recommend the book. And if people do want to follow you and keep in touch with everything that you're doing, where they can find you.
Thembeforeus.com. Go and subscribe to our newsletter. We just send something out about once a week, and there's a lot going on. So just let us equip you and fortify you. We have our own podcast, the Them Before Us podcast, and that will make you an audio expert on all the different issues that we address. If you want all of my opinions about everything, you can go to X or Twitter, and I'm at advo_Katy, Advo Katy. So that's a good place to stay up on everything we have going on as well.
Okay, lovely. Katy Faust, thank you very much.
Such a joy to talk with you today.
Thank you for tuning in to Wisdom Rebellion. Before you go, if you enjoyed the conversation, please consider subscribing. It massively helps with keeping the show on the road so we can all build a wiser world together. And if you loved this video, you will also love this one. I'll see you there.